The live stream had 847 viewers when Chase Whitmore ripped Harper's memorial necklace off her neck, the silver chain catching the fluorescent lights of Riverside Academy's chemistry lab before disappearing into his clenched fist. What none of those 847 people knew was that Harper Mitchell wasn't just another scholarship kid getting humiliated for clicks. She was the daughter of a decorated Navy SEAL who'd taught her one thing before he died: never show your true power until there's no other choice. In exactly 47 seconds, Chase would discover why that lesson mattered. And in exactly 48 seconds, his perfect world would begin crumbling like sand. If you've ever felt powerless watching someone get torn down, this story will remind you that strength comes in forms bullies never see coming. I know many of you have walked in Harper's shoes. Maybe you're walking in them right now. Your stories in the comments remind me why sharing these moments of courage matters more than ever. Because sometimes the quiet ones carry the loudest truths. And sometimes justice wears the face of a 17-year-old girl who's had enough. It was Tuesday morning at Riverside Academy, and Harper Mitchell sat in her usual spot in the back corner of advanced chemistry, her worn canvas backpack positioned strategically between her feet, textbooks arranged with military precision across the black lab table. The October sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits above expensive equipment most public schools could only dream of owning. Harper's blonde hair fell in straight lines past her shoulders, deliberately styled to create a curtain between herself and the world, while her gray eyes tracked every movement in the room with the alertness of someone who'd learned early that survival meant staying aware. She wore the regulation Riverside Academy uniform, but everything about hers screamed different. The blazer was a size too large, clearly handed down through the school's discretionary clothing program for students whose families couldn't afford the $300 official version. Her skirt had been hemmed by hand, the stitching slightly uneven despite careful attention, and her shoes, while polished to military standard, showed the telltale creases of being worn daily for over 2 years. Around her neck hung a simple silver chain with a small pendant that caught the light when she moved, the only piece of jewelry she ever wore, the only thing in her possession that seemed to hold real value. But it wasn't the uniform that marked Harper as different from her classmates. It was the way she carried herself when she thought no one was looking. Her posture was too straight for a teenager, shoulders squared in a way that spoke of discipline hammered in through years of practice, and her hands, when they weren't busy with lab equipment, rested in positions that seemed almost tactical. There was something about the way she scanned exits, positioned herself with clear lines of sight, and never fully relaxed her guard that suggested Harper Mitchell had learned lessons most 17-year-olds never needed to know. 20 feet away, Chase Whitmore held court at the center lab table like a king surveying his domain. His 6'2" frame draped casually over a stool that cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month. Everything about Chase screamed privilege and power. From his perfectly styled dark hair to his custom-tailored uniform that somehow made the same regulation outfit look like designer wear. His father owned half the commercial real estate in Northern California. His mother sat on the city council and 3 different charitable boards. And Chase himself was not only captain of the football team, but student body president-elect, with early admission to Stanford already secured through a combination of athletics, academics, and what everyone politely called family connections. But it was the phone in Chase's hand that told the real story. The latest iPhone Pro Max that he held with practiced ease, thumb swiping across the screen as he monitored multiple social media accounts simultaneously. For the past 3 months, Chase had been building what he called his social justice platform, documenting what he termed authentic high school experiences through carefully curated live streams and posts that painted him as a champion of student voices. The irony was lost on most of his followers, who saw only the polished presentations and missed the calculated cruelty that went into selecting his subjects. Around Chase clustered his usual crew, Bradley Chen, whose pharmaceutical fortune family had endowed the school's entire science wing; Madison Torres, daughter of a tech billionaire who'd made her money in apps that tracked and monetized teenage behavior; and Derek Walsh, son of the district attorney who'd made headlines prosecuting social media bullying, while somehow missing the sophisticated harassment happening in his own backyard. They formed a constellation of privilege and protection, each one insulated by family money and institutional power from consequences that would destroy ordinary students. The chemistry teacher, Mrs. Peterson, stood at the front of the room explaining molecular bonding theory, her voice competing with the subtle hum of conversations and the barely audible ping of notification sounds as students checked phones hidden beneath lab tables. Riverside Academy operated on what administrators called progressive educational policies, which mostly meant that as long as test scores stayed high and donations kept flowing, faculty were encouraged to maintain flexible classroom management styles that didn't interfere with students' authentic expression. Harper had learned to navigate this environment by becoming invisible, arriving early, leaving late, speaking only when called upon, and never, ever drawing attention to herself in ways that might invite scrutiny. She'd perfected the art of academic excellence without social visibility, maintaining a 4.0 GPA while somehow avoiding the spotlight that usually came with such achievement. Her essays were brilliant, but not provocative. Her lab reports were meticulous, but not flashy. And her class participation was consistent, but never memorable enough to make teachers see her as anything more than a reliable, quiet student who did her work and caused no trouble. But invisibility, Harper had learned, was a fragile shield, and on this particular Tuesday morning, that shield was about to shatter completely. It started with Chase's phone buzzing with a notification that made him grin, his thumb moving quickly across the screen as he opened what appeared to be a planning document shared among his inner circle. The document, titled Tuesday Content Strategy, contained a list of potential subjects for his afternoon live stream, complete with personal details that should have been private and strategic notes about how to maximize authentic reactions. Harper's name sat at the top of the list, accompanied by information that made her blood run cold, details about her father's death, her mother's work schedule, and even the specific route she took to catch the public bus after school. Chase looked up from his phone and made eye contact with Harper across the room, his smile sharp and predatory as he raised his device and casually began recording. He didn't announce the live stream, didn't ask permission, didn't acknowledge that he was violating both school policy and basic human decency. He simply pointed the camera and began performing for an audience that materialized within seconds as notifications pinged across multiple platforms. "Good morning, Riverside family," Chase said in the warm, engaging tone that had earned him 60,000 followers across various platforms. "I'm here in advanced chem with some of our most dedicated students, and I thought it might be interesting to hear about their unique perspectives on the academic experience here." His camera swept across the room before settling on Harper, who had gone very still at her table, her hands frozen in the process of measuring sodium chloride for the day's experiment. "Harper Mitchell," Chase called out, his voice carrying clearly across the room while Mrs. Peterson continued her lecture, apparently oblivious to the drama unfolding among her students. "Why don't you tell everyone about your background? I think our followers would be really interested in hearing about the scholarship program that brought you to Riverside." The notification counter on Chase's phone was climbing rapidly. 100 viewers, 200, 300, as word spread across group chats and social media platforms that something was happening. Comments began flowing in real time. A mixture of genuine curiosity and cruel anticipation as Chase's audience settled in for whatever entertainment he had planned. Harper felt every eye in the classroom turning toward her, felt the weight of invisible cameras and the pressure of an audience she'd never asked for and didn't want. "I don't think that's appropriate," Harper said quietly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her system. The same physiological response her father had taught her to recognize and control during their training sessions in the garage behind their old house. But Chase either didn't hear her objection or chose to ignore it, his performer's instincts taking over as he sensed the audience's engagement climbing. "Come on, don't be modest," Chase pressed, moving closer to her table while keeping the camera trained on her face. "I think it's really inspiring how students from different economic backgrounds can succeed here. Why don't you tell everyone about your mom's job? I heard she works nights, which must be tough on the family dynamic." The viewer count hit 400, comments flowing faster than Chase could read them. But the tone was shifting as his audience sensed something uncomfortable happening. A few users began asking questions. "Is she okay with being filmed?" and "This feels wrong," appeared among the stream of responses. But Chase had built his following on pushing boundaries and keeping it real, which apparently meant exploiting personal tragedy for content creation. Harper's hands were steady as she continued her experiment, measuring and mixing with mechanical precision, while her mind calculated options and outcomes. The same analytical process her father had drilled into her during years of tactical training, disguised as family bonding time. She could ask to be excused from class, but that would only delay the confrontation and probably make Chase more determined to pursue the content. She could complain to Mrs. Peterson, but the teacher was clearly either unaware of what was happening or unwilling to intervene in what might be perceived as student interaction. "Actually," Harper said, looking directly into Chase's camera for the first time, her gray eyes meeting the lens with an intensity that made several viewers comment on how different she suddenly seemed. "I think your audience might be more interested in hearing about academic integrity policies. Did you know that filming classmates without consent violates multiple school regulations?" Chase's smile faltered slightly, but his performer's training kicked in. "Oh, come on. We're all friends here. Besides, this is educational content. I'm just highlighting the diversity of experiences at Riverside." He stepped closer to her table, his height advantage becoming more pronounced as he loomed over her workspace. "Why don't you tell everyone about that necklace you're wearing? It looks like it has some kind of story behind it." Harper's hand moved instinctively to the silver pendant at her throat. Her father's dog tags, modified and engraved with coordinates that marked the location where Staff Sergeant Jason Mitchell had died serving his country in Afghanistan. The metal was warm from her skin, worn smooth from 3 years of constant wear, and the thought of Chase using her father's memory for social media content triggered something deep and dangerous in Harper's carefully controlled emotional landscape. The viewer count climbed past 500 as the audience sensed drama building, comments becoming more polarized as some users began defending Harper while others encouraged Chase to get the tea. Mrs. Peterson finally looked up from her periodic table diagram and noticed the commotion. her expression shifting from mild annoyance to concern as she realized one of her students was being recorded without permission. "Mr. Whitmore," Mrs. Peterson called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been teaching for 20 years. "Please, put your phone away and focus on the assignment." But Chase was too invested in his content now, too aware of his climbing viewer numbers and the engagement metrics that would determine his social media earnings for the week. "Just one more minute, Mrs. Peterson. I think this conversation could really help people understand the different perspectives that make Riverside special." He reached out as if to adjust Harper's position for better camera angle, his fingers brushing against her shoulder in what looked casual but felt invasive and deliberate. Harper's training kicked in automatically, her body recognizing unwanted contact and responding with controlled tension that spoke of muscle memory developed through years of practice. She didn't pull away dramatically or make a scene. She simply shifted slightly so that his hand fell away, while her eyes met his with a direct, measuring gaze that should have been a warning. "The only perspective worth understanding," Harper said quietly, her voice carrying clearly despite its low volume, "is that everyone deserves dignity and privacy, even scholarship students, even when they don't fight back." The comment stung because it was true. Chase had built his following on targeting students who wouldn't or couldn't retaliate, crafting content that painted him as socially conscious while actually exploiting power imbalances for entertainment. But Harper's calm delivery and direct eye contact were making him look weak in front of his audience, and weakness, in Chase's world, was unacceptable. "Fight back," Chase laughed, but the sound was forced and theatrical. "Who said anything about fighting? We're just having a conversation. Although I have to say, you seem pretty defensive for someone who supposedly has nothing to hide." The live stream audience was approaching 600 viewers now, the comment stream moving too fast to read individual responses. But the overall tone was shifting toward discomfort as viewers began recognizing the power dynamic at play. Several users began asking directly if Harper had consented to being filmed, while others questioned whether this content violated the platform's harassment policies. Harper finished her experiment with deliberate calm, recording measurements in her lab notebook with the same precise handwriting that had earned her perfect grades for 3 years. But her body language was changing subtly in ways that only someone with tactical training would recognize. Her weight was shifting to the balls of her feet, her shoulders settling into a ready position, and her breathing was becoming deeper and more controlled as she prepared for escalation. She could feel building like pressure before a storm. "You know what I think is really interesting?" Chase continued, emboldened by what he mistook for Harper's compliance, "is how some people get opportunities they didn't earn, while others have to work for everything they get. I think my followers would love to hear about how the scholarship selection process really works at schools like this." Mrs. Peterson had moved closer now, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. But before she could intervene, the bell rang, and students began packing up their materials with the efficient chaos of teenagers transitioning between classes. Chase kept his camera rolling as students filed out, his attention still focused on Harper as she gathered her belongings with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. "This has been really enlightening," Chase announced to his audience, "but I think we'll continue this conversation later, when we can really dive deep into these important social justice topics. Sometimes the most important stories come from the most unexpected places." Harper shouldered her backpack and walked toward the door, her movement fluid and controlled despite the tension radiating from every line of her body. She paused at the threshold and looked back at Chase, who was still recording and basking in the positive feedback from viewers who thought they'd just watched authentic dialogue about economic diversity in education. "Chase," Harper said quietly, her voice carrying an undertone that made several students in the hallway pause and look back. "Some stories are more dangerous than others. You might want to think about which kind you're telling." She walked away down the corridor, leaving Chase standing in the empty chemistry lab with his phone still recording and his audience still growing. But for the first time since he'd started his social media campaign, he felt a flicker of uncertainty about what he'd just set in motion. There had been something in Harper's tone, something in the way she'd moved, that suggested he might have just picked a fight with someone who was far more prepared for battle than he'd realized. The lunch period at Riverside Academy was a carefully choreographed social ecosystem. Students flowing through the main corridor and into the expansive cafeteria like schools of fish sorting themselves by invisible but absolute hierarchies. The athletes claimed the tables nearest the windows, their letter jackets and team gear marking territory as clearly as flags on conquered land, while the legacy students, those whose families had attended Riverside for generations, occupied the central tables where they could see and be seen by everyone who mattered. Academic achievers clustered near the quiet corner by the library entrance. Art students spread their projects across tables near the creative wing, and scholarship students, the few who couldn't afford to eat off campus, found spaces wherever they could without disrupting the established order. Harper typically spent lunch in the library, where she could work on assignments while eating the sandwich she packed each morning. But today, she found herself in the cafeteria, sitting alone at a table for 6 while Chase Whitmore prepared for what he'd announced on social media as Part 2 of today's Social Consciousness series. His followers had grown to over 800 since the morning's live stream, comments and shares spreading across multiple platforms as word traveled through the interconnected web of high school social media accounts. Chase had positioned himself at a table with clear sightlines to Harper's location, his phone propped on a small tripod he'd produced from his designer backpack, camera angle optimized for maximum dramatic effect. His crew surrounded him like a production team, each monitoring different aspects of the upcoming performance. Bradley tracked comment engagement on multiple platforms. Madison managed lighting and background aesthetics, and Derek served as unofficial security, ready to intervene if faculty tried to shut down the content creation. "Riverside family," Chase began, his voice warm and engaging as the viewer count climbed past 200 within the first 30 seconds. "We're back for part 2 of our conversation about diversity and opportunity in elite educational spaces. I'm here with Harper Mitchell, our scholarship representative, and I think we can dig a little deeper into some really important social justice issues." Harper continued eating her sandwich with methodical calm, turkey and cheese on white bread that she'd prepared the night before. The same meal she'd eaten for lunch every day since starting at Riverside. She didn't acknowledge Chase's camera or respond to his opening statement, her attention seemingly focused on a chemistry textbook opened beside her lunch tray. But anyone with tactical awareness would have noticed that her position gave her clear sightlines to all exits, that her backpack was positioned for quick access, and that despite her calm exterior, every muscle in her body was coiled and ready. "I think one thing that's really important to explore," Chase continued, his performer's instincts telling him that Harper's silence was actually building dramatic tension, "is how different students navigate the social and economic pressures of a place like Riverside. Harper, your mom works night shifts at the hospital, right? That must make it tough to get help with homework or participate in school activities." The viewer count hit 400 as audience members began sharing the stream across group chats and social media platforms, comments flowing in real time as people weighed in on what they were witnessing. Some viewers expressed discomfort with the apparent ambush interview, while others praised Chase for addressing important issues and highlighting diverse voices. The engagement metrics were exactly what Chase needed for his social media monetization goals, but he was too focused on performance to notice the subtle shift in Harper's body language that suggested his entertainment was about to become something else entirely. Actually, Harper said without looking up from her textbook, her voice carrying clearly across the cafeteria despite its quiet tone. I think your audience might be more interested in learning about media literacy and consent in digital spaces. Did you know that recording someone without explicit permission can constitute harassment under federal cyberbullying statutes? Chase's smile tightened, but his performer's training kept him on script. Oh, come on, Harper. This is educational content that benefits everyone. I'm trying to amplify voices that don't usually get heard in spaces like this. Besides, we're in a public place having a normal conversation. Harper finally looked up from her book, her gray eyes meeting the camera lens with an intensity that made several viewers comment about how different she seemed when she wasn't trying to be invisible. Normal conversations don't usually involve monetized live streams and audience engagement metrics. But since you're so interested in amplifying voices, why don't you tell your followers about the private group chat where you plan these ambush interviews? The cafeteria had gone quieter as students began noticing the confrontation. Conversations trailing off as classmates turned their attention to the drama unfolding between their school's social media star and the scholarship student who usually avoided all attention. Mrs. Anderson, the lunch supervisor, had also noticed the disturbance and was moving closer to the table area, her expression shifting from routine vigilance to active concern as she recognized potential trouble brewing. Chase felt his control of the narrative slipping, but doubling down was the only strategy he knew. I think you're being a little paranoid. Harper, this is just friendly dialogue about important social issues, although I have to say, your defensiveness is pretty telling. Makes me wonder what you're trying to hide. The comment was calculated to provoke a reaction, designed to make Harper look unreasonable in front of an audience that was growing larger by the minute. But instead of rising to the bait, Harper reached into her backpack and pulled out her own phone. Her movements deliberate and controlled as she navigated to a specific folder in her photo gallery. "Since you're so interested in transparency," Harper said, her voice maintaining its calm, measured tone, "maybe your audience would like to see some screenshots from your private Discord server, the one where you and your friends plan these harassment campaigns and share personal information about target students." Chase's face went pale as Harper held up her phone, showing what appeared to be screenshots of private conversations that included detailed planning documents for social media attacks. Personal information about scholarship students that should have been confidential, and most damaging of all, explicit discussions about maximizing trauma responses for better engagement metrics. The screenshots were clear enough that viewers could read the content, and the usernames matched Chase's known social media handles across multiple platforms. "That's private property," Chase stammered, his performer's mask slipping for the first time as he realized the scope of what Harper had just revealed. "You can't just hack into people's private conversations and broadcast them." Harper's smile was small and sharp. "I didn't hack anything. One of your friends shared these screenshots with school administration last week. Apparently, even people in your inner circle have limits about how far they're willing to go for content creation." The livestream audience was approaching 800 viewers now, comments exploding as people began recognizing the implications of what Harper had just revealed. Users were screenshotting the evidence and sharing it across multiple platforms, while others began digging into Chase's previous content with new understanding of the calculated cruelty behind his social justice messaging. Mrs. Anderson had reached their table area and was clearly preparing to intervene, But Harper wasn't finished with her revelation yet. She scrolled to another folder on her phone and held up additional screenshots, these showing communication between Chase and what appeared to be adult administrators discussing content management and reputation protection for students whose families made significant donations to the school. "The really interesting part," Harper continued, her voice carrying clearly as the cafeteria fell silent around them, "is how the administration has been protecting this harassment campaign because your family's donations fund the new arts center. Apparently, $2 million buys a lot of institutional blindness." Chase made a desperate grab for Harper's phone, lunging across the table in an attempt to stop her from revealing more evidence. But Harper was ready for the escalation. She pulled the device back smoothly while simultaneously rising from her seat, her movement fluid and controlled in a way that spoke of training and preparation that went far beyond what any normal 17-year-old should possess. "Don't," Harper said quietly, her voice carrying an undertone of authority that made Chase freeze mid-reach. "You really don't want to add physical assault to your legal problems." But Chase was too panicked now to think clearly, too aware of his crumbling reputation and the audience watching his perfect image dissolve in real time. He was bigger, stronger, and had always used his physical advantages to intimidate students who couldn't fight back. And his desperation made him believe that raw force could somehow salvage the situation. "Give me that phone!" Chase snarled, abandoning his performer's persona completely as he stood to his full height and loomed over Harper's smaller frame. "You don't know what you're messing with. My family has lawyers who will destroy you and your mom both." Harper looked up at him with calm, assessing eyes, her body language shifting subtly into a ready stance that only someone with combat training would recognize. The memorial necklace at her throat caught the cafeteria's fluorescent light, and for the first time since the confrontation began, she smiled with genuine warmth instead of calculated sharpness. "Chase," she said softly, her voice carrying the patience of someone explaining something to a child. "My father spent 15 years teaching me how to handle bullies who think size matters more than skill. He also taught me that the best fights are the ones you never have to throw a punch in." She held up her phone again, showing a new screen that displayed what appeared to be a recording app that had been running throughout their entire interaction. "Every word you've said, every threat you've made, every law you've broken has been recorded and automatically uploaded to multiple cloud servers. Your lawyers are welcome to try explaining that to a federal judge." Chase's face cycled through several shades of red and white as the implications hit him, his hands clenching into fists as he realized that Harper had been 3 steps ahead of him from the very beginning. The live stream audience was now approaching 900 viewers, comments flowing too fast to read as people shared the content across social media platforms and tagged news outlets and advocacy organizations. "You think you're smart," Chase said, his voice shaking with rage and humiliation. "But you're still just trailer trash who doesn't belong here. When my father hears about this, he'll make sure you and your family disappear." The threat hung in the air like a physical presence, and Harper's expression shifted from calm assessment to something much more dangerous. The change was subtle but unmistakable. A predator recognizing that diplomacy had failed and direct action was now required. "Your father," Harper said quietly, her voice carrying a new edge that made students at nearby tables step back unconsciously, "is going to be very busy dealing with federal investigators who are very interested in how Riverside Academy has been using veteran education benefits to fund harassment campaigns against military families." Chase's eyes widened as Harper revealed knowledge that should have been impossible for a scholarship student to possess. But before he could process the implications, Harper was moving, not attacking, not escalating, but simply reaching into her backpack and pulling out what appeared to be an official document with federal letterhead that made Chase's blood turn to ice water. "You see, Chase," Harper continued, her voice maintaining its calm, measured tone even as chaos erupted around them. "When you decided to target the daughter of a Navy SEAL who died serving his country, you didn't just pick a fight with a scholarship student. You picked a fight with the United States Department of Veterans Affairs, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and every single person who believes that military families deserve better than to be entertainment for entitled kids with too much money and too little conscience." The cafeteria had gone completely silent now. 300 students watching as their social media king faced a reckoning that none of them had seen coming. Chase stood frozen, his live stream still recording, his audience still growing, but his perfect world crumbling around him with each word Harper spoke. And in that moment of crystalline clarity, Harper Mitchell stepped forward, and Chase Whitmore finally understood that he had just made the biggest mistake of his privileged life. Chase lunged forward with the desperate fury of someone watching their entire world collapse in real time, his 6'2" frame moving with clumsy aggression as he reached for Harper's phone, determined to destroy the evidence that would ruin everything his family had built. But Harper had been waiting for this moment. 3 years of careful observation and tactical preparation condensing into a single, fluid motion that would end Chase Whitmore's reign of terror forever. Time seemed to slow as Harper stepped slightly to her left, her body moving with the precision of someone who'd been trained by one of America's finest warriors. She caught Chase's extended wrist with her right hand, while her left palm pressed firmly against his elbow, using his own momentum and superior weight against him in a textbook demonstration of leverage over brute force. What happened next took exactly 2.3 seconds. Harper pivoted on her back foot, guided Chase's overcommitted charge into a perfect arc, and executed a hip throw that sent the 6'2" quarterback crashing into the cafeteria floor with a sound that echoed through the stunned silence like thunder. Chase lay on the cold linoleum, gasping for breath and staring up at the ceiling tiles, while Harper stood over him with her phone still recording, her expression calm and controlled despite having just demonstrated combat skills that left 300 students speechless. The live stream audience had exploded past 1,200 viewers, comments flooding in so fast that the platform's servers struggled to keep up, as people witnessed something unprecedented in the carefully curated world of high school social media. "That," Harper said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the absolute silence of the cafeteria, "is what 15 years of Navy SEAL training looks like when passed down to someone who's tired of being your entertainment." Chase tried to sit up, his face flushed with humiliation and rage, but Harper's tactical positioning kept him at a disadvantage while she continued addressing the live stream audience that was sharing the footage across every social media platform imaginable. "For everyone who's wondering if this is real, yes, my father was Staff Sergeant Jason Mitchell, Navy SEAL Team 6, killed in action defending an Afghan village from terrorists in 2019. And yes, he taught me that strength protects people. It doesn't humiliate them for profit." The cafeteria doors burst open as Principal Henderson rushed in with 2 security guards, but instead of moving to help Chase, they headed straight for Harper, with expressions that suggested this confrontation had been anticipated by someone with authority. Behind them walked a woman in a crisp nurse's uniform who looked exactly like Harper, but 20 years older, followed by 2 men in dark suits whose federal badges caught the fluorescent lighting. "Mom," Harper said with genuine warmth, her tactical awareness never wavering even as she acknowledged her mother's arrival. "You're early." Sarah Mitchell stepped forward with the bearing of someone accustomed to command situations, her voice carrying the authority of 3 generations of military service as she addressed the still-recording live-stream audience. "My name is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, United States Army Reserve, and charge nurse at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center. What you've just witnessed is my daughter defending herself against a coordinated harassment campaign that's been targeting military families at this institution for over 2 years." Chase finally managed to stand, his designer uniform wrinkled and his perfect hair disheveled. But his attempts to salvage the situation were cut short as one of the federal agents stepped forward with official documentation that made several students gasp in recognition. "Chase Whitmore," Agent Martinez announced, his voice carrying clearly through the cafeteria's perfect acoustics. "You're under federal investigation for cyberbullying of protected military families, conspiracy to defraud veteran education programs, and violation of Title IX protections. These officers will be escorting you to answer questions about your social media activities and your family's financial relationship with this institution." The live stream audience was approaching 2,000 viewers now, the footage spreading across TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube as people recognized they were witnessing something historic. Principal Henderson attempted damage control by asking students to put away their phones. But the digital wildfire had already spread beyond containment as advocacy groups, news outlets, and military family organizations began sharing Harper's story. Chase's perfect world crumbled completely as Agent Rodriguez began reading from a thick file that detailed systematic harassment of 12 military families, financial irregularities in the school's Veteran Education Fund, and communication records showing coordination between the Whitmore family and school administrators to protect their son's harassment campaign in exchange for continued donations. The Whitmore Foundation's charitable contributions to Riverside Academy, Agent Rodriguez announced for the benefit of the recording devices, totaled $4.7 million over the past 3 years, with specific conditions requiring protection of Chase Whitmore from disciplinary action, regardless of student complaints or federal civil rights violations. Harper's mother moved to stand beside her daughter, her presence radiating the quiet strength that had sustained military families through generations of service and sacrifice. Harper's father died protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, Sarah Mitchell said, her voice carrying across the silent cafeteria. He taught her that real warriors use their strength to defend others, not to exploit them. Today, she honored his memory and protected every student who's ever been targeted by institutional bullying. As federal agents escorted Chase toward the cafeteria exit, Harper called out one final message that would become legendary in the viral video that followed. "Chase, strength isn't about what you can do to people who can't fight back. It's about what you're willing to do for people who need protection. My father taught me the difference. Maybe yours should have taught you." The live stream ended with Harper surrounded by classmates who had spent 3 years ignoring her, students who suddenly understood that the quiet scholarship girl had been the strongest person in their school all along. Within hours, her story would inspire military children across the country to speak up about harassment, lead to congressional hearings on veteran family discrimination, and result in federal legislation protecting military families from institutional bullying. But in that moment, Harper Mitchell stood in Riverside Academy's cafeteria, no longer invisible, no longer silent, finally able to honor her father's memory by becoming the warrior he'd trained her to be. The girl who'd hidden her strength for 3 years had used one perfect move to expose corruption, protect her community, and proved that sometimes the quiet ones carry the most powerful truths of all. Justice. Harper learned, sometimes wears the face of a 17-year-old girl who's finally had enough, and sometimes the most important battles are won not with violence, but with courage, truth, and one perfectly executed hip throw that changes everything.